Welcome to the Heart's Haven. Let the story begin. A poor girl finds a millionaire unconscious on the street. His identity stuns the hospital staff. Rain hammered the sidewalks of downtown Chicago like the city was trying to wash something away. Taxi lights smeared across the wet pavement in streaks of gold and red. People hurried past with their collars raised, eyes down, chasing warmth, dinner, somewhere to belong. No one noticed the man lying near the curb. At first he looked like just another shadow beneath the flickering streetlight. One expensive black coat soaked through by rain, one hand hanging limp against the concrete, a silver watch glinting faintly beneath the storm. People walked around him. Some glanced for half a second, then kept moving. A businessman muttered, "Probably drunk." A woman tightened her grip on her umbrella and crossed the street. Within seconds, the city swallowed him whole again, except for one little girl. 9-year-old Lily Carter stood beneath the awning of a closed pharmacy, clutching a torn grocery bag filled with aluminum cans. Her sneakers were damp clear through, her hoodie 2 sizes too big, sleeves hanging over her tiny hands. Raindrops clung to her eyelashes as she stared across the street at the motionless man. She should have kept walking. Her mother was waiting back at the shelter with a fever that had gotten worse that morning. Lily still needed to trade the cans for enough money to buy soup. Every minute mattered, but something about the man felt wrong, not dangerous, lonely. The traffic light changed. Horns echoed through the rain. Lily hesitated only a moment before darting across the street, nearly slipping on the slick pavement. "Sir," she whispered carefully. No response. She crouched beside him, knees soaking instantly against the cold sidewalk. Up close, he didn't smell like alcohol. He smelled like rain and expensive cologne and exhaustion. His face was pale. Water dripped slowly from dark strands of hair onto the concrete beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" Still nothing. Lily's small fingers trembled as she gently touched his shoulder. The fabric of his coat was freezing cold beneath her hand. Her breathing quickened. That's when she noticed the bloodless exhaustion in his face. Not injury, not violence, just the kind of emptiness that looked like someone had stopped fighting a long time ago. A black phone lay shattered nearby, rainwater flickering across the cracked screen. For one terrible second, Lily thought he might already be gone. Then suddenly, a weak breath, barely there, but enough. "Oh, thank God," she whispered. Cars rushed past only feet away, spraying dirty rainwater across the curb. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked if she needed help. The city kept moving like this moment didn't matter at all. Lily looked down at the stranger again. His wedding ring was gone, but the pale mark remained. His coat alone probably cost more than everything she and her mother owned combined. Yet lying there in the freezing rain, he didn't look powerful. He looked human, and somehow that hurt worse. "Please don't die," Lily said softly, shaking him again. "Please." The man stirred faintly, his brow tightening like he was trapped inside some terrible dream. His lips parted, but no words came out. Lily's heart pounded hard against her ribs. She had no phone, no money, no adult coming to save either of them. But she made a decision anyway. Standing in the middle of the storm, the little girl dropped her bag of cans onto the sidewalk and ran into the rain, screaming for help. The ambulance lights painted the rain-soaked buildings in flashing shades of red and white as Lily stood shivering beside the open doors. Her wet hoodie clung to her arms, and her chest still burned from screaming for help. 2 paramedics lifted the unconscious man onto a stretcher with practiced urgency. "Possible collapse," one of them said. "Pulse is weak, but steady." Lily stepped back instinctively, clutching the straps of her torn grocery bag with both hands. Most adults stopped noticing her the moment professionals arrived. She was used to that. But just before the ambulance doors closed, the older paramedic looked down at her. "You the one who found him?" Lily nodded quietly. The man glanced toward the soaked street behind her where aluminum cans still rolled slowly through the gutter rain. "You coming or not, kid?" Her eyes widened. "Me?" "You saved his life," he said gently. "Get in." For a second she froze. Nobody had invited her anywhere in a very long time. Then she climbed into the ambulance. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic, damp fabric, and warm plastic. Machines beeped softly beside the stretcher as the paramedics worked quickly, checking blood pressure, oxygen, heart rhythm. Lily sat silently near the back doors, hands folded tightly in her lap. Up close, the man somehow looked even more exhausted than before. His expensive coat had been removed, revealing a charcoal gray dress shirt soaked through from rain. One sleeve was wrinkled near the cuff, like he had rolled it up earlier and forgotten to fix it. He did not look like someone important. He looked like someone tired of carrying something too heavy for too long. The ambulance turned sharply onto Michigan Avenue, sirens echoing between towering buildings. One paramedic reached into the man's pocket, searching for identification. The moment he pulled out the leather wallet, everything changed. The younger medic blinked. "Wait a second." "What?" the older one asked. The younger man opened the wallet farther, eyes widening instantly. "You have got to be kidding me." Lily looked nervously between them. "What is it?" Neither paramedic answered right away. Instead, the older medic stared down at the unconscious man again, this time with complete disbelief. "Nathaniel Hayes," he muttered quietly. Even Lily recognized the name. Everybody in Chicago knew Nathaniel Hayes. His face appeared on billboards downtown beside glass skyscrapers and advertisements about innovation and financial technology. People on television called him one of the richest men in Illinois. And now he was lying unconscious 3 feet away from her. Rainwater still dripped slowly from his hair onto the ambulance floor. Lily swallowed hard. That did not make sense. Why would someone with that much money be alone on the street? Why had nobody been with him? The ambulance grew strangely quiet after that. The paramedics became even more careful, speaking in lower voices now, as though the air itself had shifted. One of them glanced toward Lily again. "Kid, you really found him alone?" She nodded. "He was cold," she whispered softly. "Nobody stopped." The older paramedic looked away for a moment after hearing that. Outside the windows, downtown Chicago blurred into streaks of light and rain. Somewhere far behind them, Lily's bag of cans still sat abandoned near the curb. For the first time all night, she remembered her mother waiting back at the shelter. Guilt twisted sharply in her chest. She should have gone back already. She should have left with everyone else. But when she looked toward Nathaniel Hayes again, pale beneath the ambulance lights, something inside her refused to walk away. His hands shifted weakly against the blanket. Just once, barely moving at all, but enough for Lily to notice. And somehow, in that loud, rushing ambulance filled with sirens and machines and strangers, the little girl who had almost nothing suddenly felt responsible for someone the entire city believed had everything. Northwestern Memorial Hospital never really slept. Even past midnight, the emergency entrance glowed beneath sheets of rain, while doctors, nurses, and patients moved through the automatic doors in restless waves. Stretchers rolled across polished floors. Phones rang somewhere behind the reception desk. The smell of coffee and antiseptic drifted through the brightly lit hallways. But the moment Nathaniel Hayes was wheeled inside, the atmosphere changed. A nurse pushing open the emergency doors looked down at the chart clipped beside the stretcher and suddenly stopped walking. "Oh my God," she whispered. Another staff member looked over her shoulder. Within seconds, recognition spread across the room like a ripple through water. "That is Nathaniel Hayes." "The Nathaniel Hayes? Hayes Financial Group?" Lily stood near the wall, dripping rainwater onto the hospital tile, while adults rushed around her. Nobody seemed to understand how strange the scene looked. One of the richest men in Chicago, unconscious, no security, no assistance, no driver, just a little girl in soaked sneakers standing beside him. Doctors immediately surrounded the stretcher, speaking quickly as they guided him through swinging double doors. Get cardiac monitoring. Run blood work. Page Dr. Levin. Lily flinched slightly when the doors shut behind them. Suddenly, the room felt enormous, and she felt very small inside it. A nurse with silver-framed glasses approached carefully, kneeling slightly to meet Lily at eye level. "Sweetheart, are your parents here?" Lily lowered her eyes. "No, ma'am." The nurse softened instantly at the answer. "What is your name?" "Lily." "Well, Lily, you did the right thing tonight." Nobody had said words like that to her before. Not really. The nurse handed her a thick hospital towel still warm from the dryer. Lily wrapped it around her shoulders slowly, almost afraid to dirty it. Across the waiting area, television screens mounted near the ceiling played muted business news. Nathaniel Hayes appeared briefly on one of them, standing confidently in a navy suit beside the opening of a new corporate tower downtown. The version on television looked untouchable. The man behind those emergency doors had looked broken. Lily could not make the two images fit together. A doctor passed by holding Nathaniel's soaked belongings inside a clear plastic bag. His cracked phone rested on top beside an expensive silver watch and a folded dark leather wallet. Something about seeing all those valuable things sitting in an ordinary plastic bag made Lily's chest ache unexpectedly. Money looked strangely unimportant in hospitals. A few minutes later, voices rose quietly near the nurse's station. "He collapsed alone?" Apparently, the child found him on the street. "That cannot be right." Lily pretended not to hear them. She sat carefully in the corner chair, feet dangling several inches above the floor, clutching the towel tightly around herself. Her stomach growled. She had not eaten since lunchtime at school. Outside, thunder rolled faintly above the city skyline. She glanced toward the emergency doors again, still closed. A vending machine hummed softly nearby. A man in green scrubs walked past carrying 2 cups of coffee. Somewhere farther down the hallway, a baby cried briefly before settling again. The whole hospital felt full of people waiting for someone they loved, and somehow Nathaniel Hayes had nobody. That thought stayed with her. After a while, the same nurse returned carrying a turkey sandwich, a small bag of pretzels, and a paper cup of hot chocolate. "You need something warm," she said gently. Lily stared at the food in surprise. "For me?" The nurse smiled. "Especially for you." For a second, Lily looked dangerously close to tears, but she blinked quickly and accepted the tray with both hands. "Thank you." The nurse hesitated before speaking again. "Dr. Levin says if you had walked away tonight," she paused softly, "things could have ended very differently for him." Lily looked down at the steaming cup, warming her fingers. Across the room, thunder shook the windows again. And somewhere beyond those emergency doors, the lonely millionaire she found in the rain was finally. The storm outside had softened to a steady drizzle by the time Dr. Levin finally stepped through the emergency doors. Exhaustion lined his face beneath the bright hospital lights, but there was relief in his eyes now instead of urgency. He spotted Lily curled up in the waiting room chair, with the towel still wrapped around her shoulders, and the untouched second half of her sandwich sitting beside her. "You are still here?" he asked gently. Lily sat up quickly. "Is he okay?" The doctor studied her for a moment before answering. It clearly surprised him that a child who owned almost nothing seemed more worried about Nathaniel Hayes than anyone else in the city. "He is stable," Dr. Levin said. "Very dehydrated. Severe exhaustion. Stress levels through the roof. But he is going to recover." Lily let out a breath she had apparently been holding for hours. The doctor glanced toward the hallway behind him. "He woke up a few minutes ago." Her eyes widened slightly. "He did?" Dr. Levin nodded slowly. "And the first thing he asked was—" He paused, almost smiling now. "Where is the little girl?" Lily looked down at her damp sneakers, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands. Nobody important had ever asked for her before. A nurse appeared carrying Nathaniel's belongings neatly folded inside a fresh hospital bag. His watch had been polished dry. His wallet rested carefully on top beside the cracked phone. Even broken, the phone looked expensive. The nurse lowered her voice. His assistant has been calling non-stop. Apparently nobody knew where he was tonight. Dr. Levin shook his head quietly. That man has an entire corporate empire looking for him, yet he collapsed alone in the rain. His expression darkened slightly. That tells you something. Lily listened silently. She did not fully understand billionaires, or companies, or financial empires, but she understood loneliness. She had seen it in her mother's eyes late at night when bills piled up beside the shelter bed. She had heard it in the silence after people promised help and never came back. Lonely always sounded the same. Dr. Levin looked back toward Lily. Would you like to see him? Her stomach tightened instantly. I do not want to get in trouble. You are not in trouble, he said softly. You saved his life. The hallway leading toward the private observation rooms felt impossibly quiet after the crowded emergency department. Their footsteps echoed gently across polished floors, while rain tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Lily walked carefully beside the doctor, still clutching the warm paper cup of hot chocolate between both hands. Room 814 sat near the end of the hallway. The door remained partially open. Inside, Nathaniel Hayes rested against elevated hospital pillows beneath dimmed lights. An intravenous line ran to his arm, while heart monitors blinked steadily beside the bed. But the thing Lily noticed first was not the machines. It was how tired he looked. Without the tailored overcoat and business headlines and giant buildings attached to his name, he looked less like a billionaire and more like someone who had forgotten how to rest. Nathaniel turned his head slowly toward the doorway. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then his eyes settled on the tiny figure standing there in oversized shelter clothes, holding a hospital cup almost too big for her hands. Recognition softened his expression immediately. You stayed, he said quietly, voice rough from exhaustion. Lily nodded once. You were cold. Something flickered across his face then. Surprise, maybe, or guilt, perhaps both. Nathaniel glanced toward the rain streaking the windows. Most people would have kept walking. Lily lowered her eyes toward the hot chocolate. I almost did. The honesty of that answer seemed to hit him harder than anything else that night. A long silence settled softly between them. Not awkward, just heavy. Finally, Nathaniel looked at her again and asked the question nobody else had bothered asking. Have you eaten dinner tonight? Lily blinked. Then very quietly, she shook her head no. Nathaniel stared at the little girl standing in his hospital doorway, and for the first time in years, silence did not feel empty. It felt honest. Chicago glimmered outside the tall windows behind him, rain sliding slowly down the glass while distant headlights crawled through midnight traffic far below. The machines beside his bed beeped softly in steady rhythm, but the sound no longer felt cold. Lily shifted nervously beneath the oversized towel around her shoulders. I had half a sandwich earlier, she said quietly, as though she needed to make the answer sound better than it was. Nathaniel frowned slightly. At school? She nodded. And before that? Lily hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. Something deep inside his chest tightened unexpectedly. Not pity, something heavier. Dr. Levin stood near the doorway, reviewing charts beneath the dim light. Her mother is staying at a women's shelter on the south side, he explained gently. High fever for several days from what Lily told us. Nathaniel turned his head slowly toward Lily again. You were collecting cans tonight. It was not a question. Lily looked embarrassed now, eyes lowering toward the hospital floor. We needed soup. The room grew painfully quiet after that. Nathaniel Hayes had spent years inside conference rooms where people fought over numbers large enough to buy entire city blocks. Millions moved across screens in seconds beneath his signature. Yet somehow, A child had stood in freezing rain trying to earn enough for soup, and she had still stopped to save a stranger. Nathaniel looked away toward the window. His reflection stared back at him faintly through the glass. Pale face, exhausted eyes, hospital gown instead of tailored suits. For the first time in a long time, he did not recognize the man looking back. "You should not have been alone out there," Lily whispered suddenly. The softness of her voice somehow hurt more than judgment would have. Nathaniel gave a weak, almost laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Neither should you." That seemed to surprise her. Children living hard lives often learn to accept loneliness as normal. Nathaniel recognized that expression instantly because he wore a different version of it every day. Dr. Levin quietly stepped out, leaving the room to them. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. After a moment, Nathaniel spoke again, voice lower now. "Do you know what happened to me tonight? You fainted?" He nodded once. "The doctors think my body finally got tired of pretending everything was fine." Lily looked at him carefully. Adults usually lied to children, especially rich adults, especially powerful ones. But this man sounded tired enough to tell the truth. Nathaniel rubbed a hand slowly across his face. "I have spent years working 14, sometimes 16 hours a day." His eyes drifted toward the ceiling. "Meetings, flights, investors, deadlines." He swallowed hard. "And somewhere along the way, I stopped sleeping properly, stopped eating properly, stopped," he paused quietly, "living properly." Lily listened without interrupting. Then after a long silence, she said something so simple it nearly broke him. "My mom says lonely people stop taking care of themselves because they think nobody would notice anyway." Nathaniel froze completely. The words landed harder than any boardroom argument ever had. Outside, thunder rolled softly over Chicago. Inside room 814, one of the most powerful men in the city suddenly found himself unable to speak to a 9-year-old girl holding a paper cup of hot chocolate. Nathaniel looked down at the blanket covering his hospital bed, but Lily's words stayed suspended in the room between them. Lonely people stop taking care of themselves because they think nobody would notice anyway. The sentence echoed through him with frightening precision. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. For years, people had noticed his money, his buildings, his interviews, his success. Entire rooms straightened when he entered them. Investors waited months for meetings with him. Reporters followed his every move. But nobody noticed when he stopped sleeping. Nobody noticed when dinners became untouched trays carried out of penthouse kitchens. Nobody noticed when silence became the loudest thing in his life. Except somehow this little girl had. Nathaniel slowly exhaled and leaned back against the pillows. Outside, the rain had finally softened into mist, blurring the lights of Chicago into pale gold streaks against the dark sky. Lily stood quietly near the window now, warming her hands around the paper cup. "You should sit down," Nathaniel said softly. She hesitated before climbing carefully into the chair beside the bed. Her feet still did not fully reach the floor. For a while, neither of them spoke. The strange thing was, it did not feel uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Nathaniel could not remember the last time silence beside another human being had felt peaceful. "You said your mother is sick," he said eventually. Lily nodded. "She has been coughing a lot." "Does she have a doctor?" Another small hesitation. "No." The answer landed heavily. Nathaniel stared toward the ceiling again. Somewhere beyond the walls of this hospital, his company managed billions of dollars in digital transactions every single day. Entire departments existed to solve problems less important than this child's reality. And yet Lily's mother had no doctor. A faint bitterness rose in his chest, not toward her, toward himself. Lily carefully set the empty hot chocolate cup on the bedside table. Her eyes wandered curiously toward the hospital bracelet around Nathaniel's wrist. The plastic band looked strangely ordinary against someone so powerful. "You really are famous?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel gave a tired smile. That depends who you ask. I saw your picture on a bus once. That bad, huh? To his surprise, Lily laughed softly. The sound was small, fragile, but real. And something inside Nathaniel shifted hearing it. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a small crack in a wall that had stood too long. Lily glanced toward the bracelet again. Can I see it? Nathaniel slid it carefully from his wrist and handed it to her. She studied the printed letters closely like it was something valuable. Nathaniel Hayes, she read quietly. Patient. That last word seemed to catch her attention most. Patient. Not billionaire, not CEO, not important, just human. Lily looked back up at him. I think hospitals make everybody equal for a little while. Nathaniel blinked slowly. Then unexpectedly he smiled for real. It was not the polished public smile from magazine covers or business conferences. This one reached his tired eyes for the first time that night. You are smarter than most executives I know, he murmured. Lily grinned shyly before carefully slipping the bracelet over her own wrist for a second. It dangled loosely against her tiny hand. Then she quickly removed it and gave it back. You should keep it, Nathaniel said suddenly. She looked startled. Really? He nodded once. To remind me somebody noticed. Lily held the bracelet gently between both hands, as though it were fragile glass. And somewhere in the quiet heart of room 814, beneath dim hospital lights and fading rain, two lonely strangers stopped feeling quite so invisible. By 2:30 in the morning, the hospital hallways had grown quieter. The rush of emergency cases had slowed. Lights dimmed slightly overhead. Nurses moved more softly now, their footsteps muted against polished floors, while rain whispered faintly against the windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Lily had fallen asleep curled sideways in the chair beside Nathaniel's bed, the oversized towel still draped around her shoulders like a blanket. One small hand rested against the hospital bracelet he had given her. Nathaniel watched her silently. Every few minutes she shifted slightly in her sleep, as though even resting had become something her body no longer fully trusted. The sight unsettled him more than any financial crisis ever had. A knock sounded softly at the partially open door. Dr. Levin stepped inside holding a tablet in one hand, his expression careful now. I did not want to wake her, he said quietly. Nathaniel nodded toward the hallway, and the two men stepped outside the room together. The moment the door closed behind them, the warmth Nathaniel had felt inside the room faded slightly. What is it? He asked. Dr. Levin exhaled slowly. We contacted the shelter where Lily and her mother are staying. Nathaniel immediately sensed something wrong. The shelter is closing temporarily tomorrow morning because of water damage in part of the building. The doctor hesitated. Most residents are being relocated where space is available. Nathaniel frowned. And Lily? That is the problem. A cold feeling settled into Nathaniel's chest. There are not enough family placement openings tonight, Dr. Levin explained carefully. If her mother's condition worsens and she needs hospital admission, he paused. Child services may temporarily separate them. Nathaniel looked back through the small glass window in the door. Lily still slept curled around the hospital bracelet. Even asleep, she looked braced for disappointment. No, Nathaniel said quietly. Dr. Levin blinked once. Excuse me? Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. She is terrified of being left alone. You can see that just by looking at her. The doctor remained silent. Nathaniel rubbed a hand slowly across his face, exhaustion still pulling heavily at his body. But beneath the fatigue, something else had begun growing stronger over the last few hours. Responsibility. Not corporate responsibility, human responsibility. She saved my life tonight, Nathaniel said softly, and somehow she is still the one at risk of losing everything. Dr. Levin studied him carefully. What are you saying? Nathaniel looked down the quiet hallway, lined with sleeping patients and flickering monitors. For years, he had avoided emotional attachment with ruthless precision. Relationships complicated things. Caring complicated things. It was easier to remain untouchable, safer. But Lily had already stepped straight through every wall he built. She should not have to wonder where she is sleeping tomorrow night, he murmured. Before Dr. Levin could answer, the hospital room door creaked softly open behind them. Lily stood there rubbing sleep from her eyes. For a moment she looked disoriented. Then she noticed the tension in both adults' faces. Fear appeared instantly. Not dramatic fear, the quiet kind children develop after hearing too many conversations that end badly. "What happened?" she asked softly. Nobody answered immediately. Lily's fingers tightened around the hospital bracelet. "Please," her voice trembled now, "please do not send me somewhere away from my mom." Nathaniel felt something crack sharply inside his chest hearing those words. Not because she sounded emotional, because she sounded practiced, like she had learned long ago that people could disappear overnight. Lily lowered her eyes toward the floor. "I can sleep in the shelter lobby if I have to," she whispered quickly. "I will be quiet, I promise." Nathaniel stared at her for one long, silent moment. Then finally, firmly, he said the words neither of them expected. "You are not going back there tomorrow." The hallway fell completely silent after Nathaniel spoke. Even the distant hospital noises seemed to fade for a moment. Lily stared at him as though she was trying to decide whether the words were real or just another promise adults said when they felt sorry for someone. Dr. Levin folded his arms quietly. "Nathaniel?" But Nathaniel did not look away from Lily. "You should be somewhere warm," he said gently. "Somewhere safe." Lily's fingers tightened around the bracelet. "People say things like that sometimes." The honesty in her voice hit harder than accusation ever could. Nathaniel swallowed slowly. "And then they leave?" She nodded once. A painful understanding passed through his expression then. Because despite the difference in their lives, Nathaniel suddenly realized they shared the exact same fear. Being forgotten. Rain drifted softly against the windows as Dr. Levin checked something on his tablet again. "There may be one option," the doctor said carefully. "St. Anne's has temporary family medical suites for parents and children when emergency housing situations happen." He glanced toward Nathaniel. "Normally there is a waiting list." Nathaniel answered immediately. "Call them." Dr. Levin raised an eyebrow. "At 3 in the morning?" "Yes." The doctor almost smiled. "People usually do not argue with you much, do they?" Nathaniel gave a tired shrug. "Not often." For the first time that night, Lily smiled again. Small, careful, but real. An hour later, arrangements were already moving faster than anyone expected. Hospital staff contacted St. Anne's medical residents, while another physician reviewed Lily's mother's symptoms remotely from the shelter clinic. Nathaniel sat quietly while nurses removed his intravenous line. "You should still rest another day," Dr. Levin warned him. Nathaniel looked toward Lily sitting nearby with her knees pulled against her chest. "I think I rested enough while lying unconscious on a sidewalk." The doctor sighed softly. "You really mean to help them." Nathaniel stared at the rain beyond the glass. "I spent years believing success meant never needing anyone." His voice lowered slightly. Tonight, a 9-year-old girl proved how wrong that was. Just before dawn, the city outside began turning pale gray beneath the clouds. Chicago looked softer at sunrise. Less cold somehow. A hospital volunteer arrived carrying clean, donated clothes for Lily. Fresh sneakers, jeans without holes in the knees, a pale blue hoodie still folded from the store shelf. Lily touched the fabric carefully, like it might disappear if she held it too tightly. "These are mine?" The volunteer smiled warmly. "Yes, sweetheart." Lily looked overwhelmed. Nathaniel watched silently from his chair near the window. He had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars in his lifetime. None of them had ever felt this important. A few minutes later, Lily stepped out of the restroom wearing the new hoodie and shoes. The sleeves still covered part of her hands, but this time because they were soft and warm instead of worn out. Nathaniel looked up at her, and something inside him healed a little at the sight. Not completely, but enough to finally feel it beginning. 3 weeks later, the rain returned to Chicago. Not the violent storm from that night, just a soft spring drizzle drifting through downtown streets like the city itself had finally exhaled. Nathaniel Hayes stood quietly beneath the same flickering streetlight where his world had nearly ended. Cars moved past slowly on wet pavement. Umbrellas crossed intersections. Somewhere nearby, a train rumbled above the tracks. Everything looked exactly the same, and yet nothing felt the same anymore. Nathaniel adjusted the dark wool coat around his shoulders and glanced toward the curb where he had once collapsed alone in the rain. He remembered the cold, the silence, the terrifying feeling that nobody would notice if he disappeared. But somebody had noticed. A little girl everyone else ignored. Behind him, a small voice broke gently through the drizzle. "You came back." Nathaniel turned. Lily stood a few feet away wearing her pale blue hoodie and clean white sneakers splashed lightly with rainwater. Beside her stood her mother, Rebecca Carter, thinner than she should have been but healthier now, color slowly returning to her face after weeks of treatment and rest. Nathaniel smiled softly. "I told you I would." Lily stepped closer, her hands tucked inside the sleeves of the hoodie. Around one wrist still hung the hospital bracelet from room 814. She had kept it all this time. Nathaniel noticed immediately. "You still have it." Lily nodded shyly. "It reminds me that somebody noticed me too." For a moment, emotion closed painfully around Nathaniel's throat, because she did not understand what she had truly done. She thought she had saved a man from collapsing in the street, but she had really saved something far more fragile than that, his ability to feel human again. Across the city, headlines about Nathaniel Hayes had changed completely over the last few weeks. Reporters talked about the emergency housing foundation he quietly funded after learning how many families disappeared through gaps in the system. Several shelters across Chicago had already received repairs, staffing support, and expanded medical partnerships. But none of those things mattered most to him. What mattered was standing here now beside two people who no longer looked afraid of tomorrow. Rebecca stepped forward gently. "I do not think I will ever have words big enough to thank you." Nathaniel shook his head slowly. "Your daughter already did." Lily looked confused by that answer. Nathaniel crouched slightly so they stood eye level again, just like she had beside him in the rain that night. "Most people saw a rich man on the ground," he said softly. "You saw a person." Rain tapped quietly against the sidewalks around them. Warm light spilled from nearby apartment windows while traffic hummed through the distance. And for the first time in many years, Nathaniel Hayes no longer felt alone inside the city he helped build. As Lily slipped her small hand into his, the narrator's voice lingered gently over the fading rain. "Sometimes the people who save our lives are not the powerful ones. Sometimes they are simply the ones kind enough to stop walking away."